Captain Relnath stood on the bridge of the gentle tide, watching his navigation screen with growing concern. The merchant vessel had been traveling through this sector for 3 days without incident, carrying medical supplies and cultural artifacts to the Valorian colonies on the outer rim. Everything had seemed peaceful until now. The alarm system suddenly screamed to life. Relnath's thin fingers flew across the console as he tried to understand what was happening. His crew of 12 Valorians scrambled to their stations, their large eyes wide with fear. Valorians were a peaceful species, with hollow bones and delicate frames suited to their low-gravity homeworld. They had been part of the galactic community for 300 years and had never once encountered violence in space. On the screen, 14 ships appeared from behind a dead moon. They were ugly vessels covered in weapons and armor plating. Relnath's blood went cold as he recognized the markings. The Kresh Consortium, pirates and predators who had been growing bolder in recent months, attacking ships in the outer territories where community patrols rarely ventured. His communications officer, a young Valorian named Selthan, turned to him with trembling hands. "Captain, they're hailing us. They demand we cut our engines and prepare to be boarded." Relnath had heard stories about the Kresh. They were large insectoid beings, each one standing nearly 3 meters tall with razor-sharp limbs and an exoskeleton that could deflect most hand weapons. They viewed smaller species as prey, as resources to be taken and used. The galactic community had tried diplomatic approaches with them, but the Kresh only understood strength, and the community forces were spread too thin to patrol every sector. "Try to signal the nearest patrol," Relnath ordered, though he already knew it was hopeless. The closest community ships were at least 3 days away at maximum speed. Before Selthan could respond, the gentle tide shuddered violently. The Kresh had fired on their engines, disabling their ability to jump to faster-than-light travel. The ship was now dead in space, drifting with only minimal maneuvering thrusters. "They're launching boarding pods," another crew member called out. Relnath felt his heart sinking. He looked at his crew, seeing the fear in their faces. Most of them had families waiting at home. They had signed up for a peaceful merchant run, not this. He had failed them as their captain. "Send a distress call on all frequencies," he said quietly. "All of them. Emergency channels, commercial channels, everything." Selthan hesitated. "Captain, that includes the restricted channels. The human frequencies." Relnath nodded. Humanity had joined the galactic community 15 years ago, but they remained mysterious and somewhat frightening to most species. They came from Earth, a planet classified as a Class 12 Deathworld, the highest possible rating, a world where everything seemed designed to kill its inhabitants. High gravity, violent weather, predators at every level of the food chain, and diseases that could wipe out entire populations. Humans had evolved in that nightmare and had somehow thrived. They were dense with muscle, could survive injuries that would kill most species, and possessed an endurance that seemed impossible. They could run for hours without stopping, could function on minimal sleep, and could eat things that were toxic to almost everyone else. Most species in the community kept their distance from humans. There were too many stories. Stories about their wars, about the weapons they had created, about the fact that they had nearly destroyed themselves dozens of times before finally reaching the stars. They were unpredictable, intense, and carried themselves with a confidence that suggested they feared very little. But Relnath was desperate. "Do it. Send the signal everywhere." The distress call went out into the void, broadcasting their position and their situation. Relnath didn't expect anyone to answer in time. The message was more for whoever found their wreckage later, so at least someone would know what had happened to the gentle tide and her crew. The Kresh boarding pods clamped onto the hull with heavy thuds that echoed through the ship. Relnath could hear the cutting torches beginning their work, slicing through the outer doors. His crew huddled together in the bridge, holding whatever makeshift weapons they could find, though everyone knew it was useless. Valorians were not fighters. Then something impossible happened. The communications console crackled to life. A voice came through, speaking in clear galactic standard with a slight accent that marked the speaker as human. The voice was calm and professional, showing no signs of panic or concern. "Gentle tide, this is the UNS Harbinger. We have received your distress call and are responding. Current distance is 6.2 light hours. We will reach your position in 40 minutes. Hold your position and protect your crew. Harbinger out." Relnath stared at the console in disbelief. 40 minutes? That was impossible. Even the fastest community ships would need at least 6 hours to cover that distance, and that was pushing their drives to dangerous limits. Human ships weren't supposed to be any faster than standard galactic technology. Selthan was checking his sensors, his hands shaking. "Captain, I'm reading the human ship's signature. They're accelerating. The speed they're showing would tear apart any normal vessel." One of the Kresh boarding pods breached the hull on the lower deck. Relnath could hear the sounds of his crew members down there screaming as the pirates entered the ship. He wanted to help them, but he was frozen, torn between the impossible hope that humans were actually coming and the very real terror of what was happening right now. The Kresh warlord's voice came over the communications channel, thick with menace and amusement. "Little bird bones, we are coming for you. Your ship belongs to us now. Your cargo belongs to us. You belong to us." Relnath found his voice, though it shook. "Human vessels are on their way. They will be here soon." The Kresh warlord laughed, a horrible chittering sound. "Humans, the Deathworlders, they are far away and we are here now. By the time anyone arrives, you will be in our holds and your ship will be scrap." The cutting torches on the bridge door began their work. Relnath could see the metal starting to glow red. His crew pressed back against the far wall, clutching each other. He had led them into this, and now he could do nothing to save them. But somewhere in the darkness of space, something was coming, something that moved faster than it should, something that had heard a call for help and had answered with a simple promise. "Help is on the way." The bridge door was almost cut through. Relnath could see the Kresh claws reaching through the gaps in the metal, tearing at the edges. His crew had stopped making sounds. They simply waited for the end, huddled together in their final moments. Then something changed. The entire ship suddenly lit up with warning alerts. Not from internal damage, but from external sensors detecting massive energy signatures. Selthan, still at his post despite the terror, looked at his screen and made a sound of complete disbelief. "Captain, something just appeared 3,000 kilometers from our position." The cutting stopped. Even the Kresh seemed to pause, sensing that something was wrong. "What appeared?" Relnath asked, barely daring to hope. "Ships. 7 ships. Human signatures." "Captain, they shouldn't be here yet. It's only been 42 minutes." Reality itself seemed to tear open in the space nearby. The sensors showed 7 vessels emerging from a form of faster-than-light travel that didn't match anything in the galactic community databases. The ships hadn't bent space around them like normal drives. They had simply skipped through it, appearing exactly where they needed to be. The lead ship was massive, easily twice the size of the largest Kresh vessel. The name UN's Harbinger was painted along its hull in white letters. Flanking it were 2 destroyers named Relentless and Defiant, 3 smaller frigates, and 1 specialized craft that looked designed for boarding operations. The Kresh immediately abandoned their assault on the gentle tide and turned their ships to face this new threat. They had 14 warships to the human 7. In any normal calculation of space combat, the Kresh had the advantage. A communication channel opened. Relnath quickly accessed it, desperate to hear what would happen next. The human voice from before spoke again, but this time it was coming from a video feed. Commander Jack Hayes appeared on screen, a human male with short dark hair and eyes that seemed to calculate everything they saw. He wore a dark blue uniform with insignia that Relnath didn't recognize. "Kresh vessels, this is Commander Jack Hayes of the UNS Harbinger. You are engaging in hostile actions against a civilian vessel in violation of galactic community law. You have 30 seconds to disengage from the gentle tide and power down your weapons. If you do not comply, we will interpret your continued actions as hostile intent and respond accordingly." The Kresh warlord appeared on the channel, his massive insectoid form filling the screen. His compound eyes gleamed with amusement and his mandibles clicked together in what might have been laughter. "Humans, we have heard stories about your kind. You come from a dangerous world and think that makes you warriors, but you are alone here, far from your colonies. We are Kresh. We have hunted prey across 100 systems. We have destroyed community patrols. We do not fear 7 ships no matter what world you crawled from." Commander Hayes' expression didn't change. His voice remained calm and professional. 20 seconds. The Kresh warlord made a gesture with his bladed forelimbs, a sign of dismissal and contempt. "You may have your metal ships and your primitive weapons, but in close combat you will fall like all prey does. We will take your ships and add them to our fleet. We will see if Deathworlders bleed the same as others. 10 seconds. You cannot match our numbers, human." This is your last chance to flee. Hayes's response was a single word delivered with absolute certainty. Noted. The channel closed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. The Kresh ships began moving into attack formation, clearly expecting the humans to either run or engage in some kind of preliminary negotiation, as most community species would. Then the humans opened fire. What happened next would be studied by every military academy in the galactic community for years to come. The human fleet moved with a coordination and precision that seemed impossible without advanced artificial intelligence. Yet later analysis would show that every decision was made by human officers responding to battlefield conditions in real time. The weapons weren't energy-based like most galactic technology. Instead, the humans used kinetic systems. Massive railguns fired projectiles at relativistic speeds, and missile systems launched warheads that accelerated to fractions of light speed. The first salvo struck 3 Kresh ships before their crews even realized they were under attack. But the humans didn't destroy the ships. They crippled them. Railgun rounds punched through engine sections with surgical precision. Missiles detonated near weapon systems, shredding them with shrapnel while leaving the main hull intact. Within 30 seconds of the first shot, 3 Kresh vessels were disabled and drifting, their crews alive but their ships combat ineffective. The Kresh warlord screamed orders at his remaining ships. They began firing back with their plasma cannons and energy weapons. The human point defense systems came online, and Relnath watched in amazement as human gunners intercepted incoming fire with the accuracy that seemed impossible. Small cannons tracked missiles and plasma bolts, destroying them microseconds before impact. 2 Kresh destroyers attempted to close the distance, thinking they could use their heavier armor to ram the human vessels. The human frigates moved to intercept, their engines burning at levels that should have melted their systems. They didn't ram. Instead, they passed within meters of the Kresh ships while firing concentrated bursts into specific points on the enemy hulls. The Kresh destroyers began venting atmosphere. Their hulls, designed to withstand energy weapons, simply couldn't handle the kinetic impacts. Metal tore like paper under the relentless assault. A Kresh cruiser managed to land a solid hit on the human destroyer named Relentless. The plasma bolt scorched across its hull, melting armor. For a moment, the Kresh warlord must have felt hope. But the Relentless didn't slow down. It rotated on its axis and returned fire with both railguns. The Kresh cruiser's bridge exploded and the ship went dark. The battle lasted 8 minutes from first shot to final surrender. When it ended, 12 Kresh ships were disabled and drifting in space. 2 had managed to engage their faster-than-light drives and escape, fleeing into the outer darkness. The human fleet had taken minor damage to 2 ships. No human casualties. Commander Hayes opened a channel to the Kresh warlord's flagship, which was now tumbling slowly, its engines destroyed. Kresh vessels, you are ordered to stand down and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. You have 1 minute to comply. There was no response. No threats. No bravado. The Kresh had learned a fundamental lesson that predators throughout history eventually face. There is always something higher on the food chain. The human boarding craft detached from the Harbinger and moved toward the Kresh flagship. Relnath watched on his sensors, barely able to process what he had just witnessed. His crew stood behind him, equally stunned. Then Commander Hayes' face appeared on Relnath's personal communication screen. The human's expression had softened slightly, though his eyes still held that calculating intensity. Captain Relnath of the Gentle Tide, this is Commander Hayes. Please report your status. Do you have casualties? Is your crew secure? Relnath found his voice, though it trembled. We have 3 injured on the lower decks. The Kresh had begun boarding when you arrived. My crew is shaken but alive. Hayes nodded. We're dispatching a medical team to your location. They'll help with your injured and assess damage to your ship. You're safe now, Captain. Safe. The word seemed impossible after everything that had just happened. But as Relnath looked at the disabled Kresh ships drifting around them, he realized it was true. The humans had come. They had fought. And they had won. 20 minutes after the battle ended, a human shuttle docked with the Gentle Tide. Relnath stood near the airlock with half of his crew, while the others tended to the injured below. His hands wouldn't stop shaking. He had heard so many stories about humans, about their violence and unpredictability, and now he was about to meet them face to face. The airlock cycled open, and 5 humans stepped through. They wore white medical uniforms with blue insignia, and they carried equipment cases. The one in front was a female with light brown hair tied back in a practical style. She was tall by Valorian standards, probably average for her species, but to Relnath she seemed impossibly solid and strong. She smiled when she saw him, and to his surprise, it was a gentle expression. "Captain Relnath, I'm Dr. Lisa Grant. We're here to help with your injured crew members." Her voice was softer than Commander Hayes's, warmer. Relnath felt some of his fear ease, though he remained cautious. "Doctor, thank you for coming. Our injured are on the lower deck. I can show you the way." Lisa nodded and gestured for her team to follow. As they walked through the corridors of the gentle tide, Relnath couldn't help but study them. The humans moved with an efficiency that spoke of extensive training, but they weren't aggressive or threatening. They asked questions about Valorian physiology, about the ship's atmosphere, about what kind of injuries to expect. On the lower deck, 3 Valorian crew members lay on makeshift beds. One had a broken arm from when the Kresh had thrown him against a wall. Another had cuts across his torso from Kresh claws. The third was unconscious, having hit his head during the initial attack. Lisa and her team went to work immediately. They moved with practiced precision, using scanners to assess the injuries and then treating them with supplies from their cases. What surprised Relnath most was how gentle they were. These were the same species that had just disabled 12 warships in 8 minutes. And yet they handled his fragile crew members like they were made of crystal. Lisa spoke softly to the injured Valorians, explaining what she was doing before she did it. "This is just a bone knitter. It's going to feel warm, but it won't hurt. We'll have that arm fixed in about 10 minutes. One of her team members, a male named Peter, was working on the unconscious crew member. He looked up at Relnath with concern. "Captain, he has a concussion, but he's stable. We're going to give him something to reduce the swelling. He should wake up in a few hours." Relnath watched in amazement as the humans worked. "How do you know so much about Valorian physiology?" "We've barely had any contact with your people." Lisa glanced up from her work, that gentle smile returning. "We make it our business to know our neighbors, Captain. When humanity joined the galactic community, one of the first things we did was study every species we might encounter. We have medical protocols for 243 different species. It's important to us that we can help if needed." The idea that humans had spent years preparing to help other species contradicted everything Relnath had heard about them. He had been told they were dangerous, violent, unpredictable, but here they were, carefully mending bones and treating wounds with a skill that would impress any Valorian doctor. After the medical team finished their work, Lisa stayed behind while her team returned to their shuttle for more supplies. She sat down next to Relnath in the crew common area, accepting a drink of water that he offered. "Your crew will be fine," she said. "The injuries weren't as serious as they could have been. You're lucky the Kresh didn't have more time." Relnath nodded, then asked the question that had been burning in his mind. "Dr. Grant, why did you come?" "Commander Hayes said help was on the way, but you were 6 light hours away. Most species wouldn't have responded at all, knowing they couldn't arrive in time. Yet you came anyway, and you came fast enough to save us." Lisa's expression became more serious. "Because you needed help, Captain. That's reason enough. We heard your distress call and we responded. It's what anyone should do." "But the risk," Relnath pressed. "You pushed your ships beyond normal speeds. You engaged 14 hostile vessels with only 7 of your own. You could have been destroyed." Lisa shook her head. "Commander Hayes knew what he was doing. Our ships are built for speed and combat effectiveness, and as for the risk, well, some things are worth taking risks for. Innocent people being attacked by pirates is one of those things." Before Relnath could respond, his communication console chimed. It was Commander Hayes requesting a video link. Relnath accepted, and the human commander's face appeared on the screen. "Captain Relnath, I wanted to update you on the situation. We've secured all Kresh vessels and taken their crews into custody. However, we found something during our boarding operations that I need to inform you about." Hayes's expression was grim. The Kresh weren't just pirates stealing cargo. They've been running slaving operations. We found holding cells in 3 of their ships, containing members of various species. Some of them have been captive for months. Relnath felt sick. Slavery had been outlawed in the galactic community for centuries. The fact that it was happening in the outer territories was horrifying. Hayes continued, his voice taking on an edge that made Relnath remember exactly how dangerous humans could be. We're going to free all the captives and return them to their homeworlds. As for the Kresh, they'll face justice. But I want you to know that this changes things. This wasn't just a random attack. The Kresh have been operating a criminal enterprise right under the community's nose. What will you do? Relnath asked. His eyes hardened. We're going to make sure this never happens again. We're going to send a message that slavery won't be tolerated. Not in community space, not anywhere. The Kresh thought they could prey on weaker species because the community didn't have the strength or will to stop them. They were wrong. Lisa, sitting next to Relnath, spoke up. Commander, are we involving the Community Council? Hayes nodded. Yes. Ambassador Karen White is already preparing a presentation for them. They need to know what's been happening out here. But regardless of what the Council decides, humanity's position is clear. After the call ended, Relnath sat in silence for a long moment. Lisa watched him, waiting patiently for him to process everything. Finally, he spoke. Your people terrify the rest of the galaxy, you know. We hear stories about Earth, about the wars you fought, about the weapons you created. We hear that humans are violent and dangerous. Lisa nodded slowly. We can be. We won't deny that. Humans have a capacity for violence that comes from evolving on a world that was constantly trying to kill us. But we also have a capacity for compassion, for protection, for justice. We choose when to be gentle and when to be fierce. Relnath looked at her, this human who had carefully mended his crew's injuries with such gentle hands. That's what makes you truly frightening. Not that you can be violent, but that you can choose. You control it, Lisa smiled, though it was sad. It took us a long time to learn that control, Captain. We nearly destroyed ourselves learning it. But we did learn. And now we use that strength to protect others who can't protect themselves. Outside the window, Relnath could see the human ships holding position around the disabled Kresh vessels. 7 ships that had defeated 14 in minutes. 7 ships crewed by beings from a death world who had chosen to answer a distress call from strangers. For the first time since joining the galactic community 300 years ago, the Valorians had found someone who would fight for them. 2 days after the incident, the Galactic Community Council chambers were filled to capacity. Representatives from 43 species sat in their designated areas, waiting for the emergency session to begin. The chamber was a massive circular structure, with translation devices ensuring everyone could understand each other despite the variety of languages and communication methods. The Kresh Consortium had filed a formal complaint against humanity, demanding reparations for destroyed ships and claiming excessive force. Their representative, a smaller Kresh named Vector, who served as a diplomat, stood at the central podium. His mandibles clicked rapidly as he spoke, a sign of agitation. Honored council members, the Kresh Consortium brings forth charges of aggressive military action against the human delegation. Human warships destroyed 12 of our vessels without proper warning or diplomatic engagement. This is a clear violation of community protocols regarding proportional response. We demand that the humans be censured and forced to pay for the vessels they destroyed. Several council members nodded in agreement. The community had strict rules about military engagement, designed to prevent wars and promote peaceful resolution. Even pirates were supposed to be given multiple chances to surrender before lethal force was authorized. Ambassador Karen White sat in the human delegation area, watching the Kresh representative with an expression that revealed nothing. She was a woman in her 50s with gray-streaked hair and eyes that had seen decades of diplomatic negotiations. Next to her sat 3 military advisors and 2 legal experts, all studying the proceedings carefully. When Vector finished speaking, the council arbiter, a tall crystalline being named Crystallix, gestured for the human delegation to respond. Karen stood and walked to the podium carrying a data tablet. She placed it on the podium's interface, connecting it to the chamber's display systems. Thank you, Arbiter Crystallix. Before I address the charges brought by the Kresh Consortium, I would like to present evidence that the Council needs to see. The main display screens around the chamber flickered to life. What appeared made several council members gasp in shock. The screens showed recordings from inside Kresh ships, specifically the cargo holds. There were cells, dozens of them, containing beings from various species. Some were Valorians like Relnath's people. Others were from species that served on the Council itself. Karen's voice was steady as she narrated what the recording showed. What you're seeing are the cargo holds of the Kresh vessels that engaged the gentle tide. These recordings were taken by our boarding teams after securing the ships. As you can see, the Kresh weren't just pirates stealing cargo. They were operating a slaving ring. The chamber erupted in noise. Representatives shouted questions and protests. The Kresh delegate Vector tried to speak but was drowned out by the chaos. Arbiter Crystallix had to activate the order chimes 3 times before the chamber quieted down. Karen continued, her voice now carrying an edge that made several species shift uncomfortably. We found evidence that the Kresh Consortium has been conducting these operations for at least 18 months. They've captured and sold over 300 beings from 20 different species. Some of the captives we rescued had been held for more than a year. She pulled up more data on the screens. These are flight logs from Kresh vessels, showing routes into uncharted space where these captives were being sold. These are financial records showing profits from these sales, and these are communications between Kresh warlords discussing which species were most valuable as slaves. The chamber fell silent. Even the Kresh delegate seemed unable to find words. Karen let the evidence speak for itself for nearly a minute before continuing. The Kresh representative claims we used excessive force. I would like to remind the Council of what actually occurred. Commander Hayes gave the Kresh 30 seconds to stand down and surrender. They refused. They chose combat. Our forces responded with appropriate military action, and notably we disabled their ships rather than destroying them. We could have eliminated all 14 vessels in the same 8 minutes. We chose not to. We chose to preserve Kresh lives even as we stopped their criminal activities. A council member from the Thessarian delegation, a species known for their pacifist philosophy, raised a tentacle to speak. Ambassador White, while the crimes of the Kresh are indeed horrible, the community has procedures for dealing with such matters. Why did your forces not simply hold the Kresh vessels and wait for community peacekeepers to arrive? Karen's expression hardened slightly. Because Representative Thesis, the nearest community peacekeepers were 3 days away. The captives in those Kresh holds had been tortured and starved. 3 days might have meant more deaths. Human forces made the decision to act immediately because it was the right thing to do. Another council member spoke up, this one from a species that had been among those found in the Kresh holding cells. Ambassador White, my people owe humanity a debt. You saved 12 of our citizens, but many here are concerned about human military capability. Your ships moved faster than should be possible. Your weapons were more effective than any community technology. This makes some of us uncomfortable. Karen nodded, acknowledging the concern. I understand. Humanity does have advanced military technology. We come from a death world where survival required constant innovation and adaptation. But I want to be clear about something important. Humanity didn't develop our military to threaten anyone. We developed it because we spent thousands of years fighting each other. And we learned painful lessons about what happens when good people can't defend themselves against predators. She paused, looking around the chamber. Every species here has a history. Some of you evolved on peaceful worlds where cooperation was always the best strategy. Some of you achieved spaceflight without ever developing weapons of war. That's admirable, and humanity respects that. But our history was different. We had to learn to fight before we learned to farm. We mastered fire and fury before we mastered civilization. The Kresh delegate Vector finally found his voice. So the humans admit they are a warrior species, bred for violence. This is exactly why we brought this complaint. Humans are dangerous. Karen's response came quickly, and her tone made several species in the chamber lean back instinctively. Yes, Representative Vector, humans can be dangerous. Very dangerous. But here's what you and your consortium failed to understand. We choose when to be dangerous. We chose to save the gentle tide. We chose to rescue the captives in your holding cells. We chose to disable your ships rather than destroy them. She walked closer to where Vector stood, and though she was smaller than the Kresh, somehow she seemed to dominate the space. You want to talk about excessive force? Let me tell you what excessive force would have looked like. Excessive force would have been tracking down every Kresh ship in this sector and destroying them. Excessive force would have been turning your home colonies into debris fields. Excessive force would have been making sure the Kresh Consortium ceased to exist as anything more than a cautionary tale. The chamber was absolutely silent now. Karen's voice dropped lower, but it carried to every corner. Commander Hayes showed up with 7 ships. Let me make something very clear to this council and to the Kresh Consortium. Earth has 600 warships. Mars has 400 more. Titan Station can mobilize another 200 within a week. And those are just the numbers we'll tell you about. She let that information sink in before continuing. What you saw at the Harbinger event wasn't humanity's military might. It was 7 ships responding to a distress call. It was us being gentle. So please, Representative Vector, consider very carefully whether you want to find out what humans do when we're not showing restraint. Vector's mandibles clicked nervously. Several other council members looked uncomfortable, shifting in their seats or adjusting their environmental suits. Karen returned to the podium, her expression softening slightly. Humanity doesn't want war with anyone. We want to be part of this community. We want to trade, to share knowledge, to explore the galaxy together. But we have a very specific position on certain things. We don't tolerate slavery. We don't negotiate with it. We don't look the other way when it happens. And we will end it wherever we find it. She looked directly at the Arbiter. The Kresh Consortium engaged in hostile actions against a civilian vessel and operated a criminal slaving enterprise that victimized community citizens. Humanity responded appropriately and proportionally. We request that the Council dismiss the Kresh complaint and instead focus on the real issue, which is how slaving operations were allowed to flourish in community space without anyone stopping them. The Arbiter considered this for a long moment before speaking. The Council will review all evidence presented and issue a ruling within 3 days. This session is adjourned. As the Council members filed out, many of them were talking quietly among themselves, casting glances at the human delegation. The galaxy had just learned something important about humanity. They were willing to help, willing to protect, willing to show mercy. But they had limits, and crossing those limits would reveal exactly what a Deathworld species could do when truly provoked. 6 months after the Harbinger event, the outer territories of galactic community space looked very different. The Kresh Consortium, once a unified threat that had terrorized shipping lanes for years, had fractured into competing factions. Some warlords had surrendered to human forces, choosing imprisonment over being hunted. Others had fled deeper into uncharted space, only to discover that human reconnaissance vessels could operate in conditions that would kill most species. Captain Relnath stood on the observation deck of a new Valorian merchant station, watching ships come and go through the busy space lanes. Trade had increased by 40% in the sector since human patrols had begun. Species that had avoided these routes for fear of pirates now traveled freely, knowing that if they sent a distress call, help would actually arrive. Next to Relnath stood Commander Jack Hayes, dressed in his formal uniform. The human had been invited to the station's opening ceremony as a guest of honor. Despite the formal occasion, Hayes seemed relaxed, sipping from a container of Valorian tea that Relnath had insisted he try. "How is it?" Relnath asked, gesturing to the tea. Hayes smiled slightly. "Sweet, very sweet, but good." They watched in comfortable silence as a human patrol ship glided past the station, its hull painted with the distinctive insignia of the Outer Territories Protection Fleet. It was one of 50 human vessels now assigned to patrol these sectors, working alongside community peacekeepers who had finally been given the resources and authority to do their jobs properly. "I still find it hard to believe," Relnath said quietly. 6 months ago, I thought my crew and I were going to die. Now look at this. A new station, safe trade routes, families reunited with loved ones who had been taken by slavers, all because you answered a distress call." Hayes shook his head. "It wasn't just us, Captain. You sent that call. You held your crew together when the Kresh boarded your ship, and after everything happened, you spoke to the Council about what you experienced. You became an ambassador for understanding between our peoples." That was true. Relnath had been asked to speak at several galactic community assemblies about his experience with humans. He had stood before audiences of species who feared humanity, who thought of them only as dangerous Deathworlders, and he had told them the truth. Yes, humans could be terrifying in combat. Yes, they came from a world that would kill most species within hours. But they also chose to use that strength to protect others. His speeches had helped change perceptions. Slowly, species that had kept their distance from humanity began to reach out. Trade agreements were signed. Cultural exchanges were established. And most importantly, other species began to understand that having a powerful ally wasn't something to fear. It was something to appreciate. A chime sounded on Relnath's communication device. He checked it and smiled. "Commander, there's someone here who wanted to see you." A few minutes later, Dr. Lisa Grant arrived on the observation deck. accompanied by 3 Valorian medical personnel. She had been conducting training sessions at the news station, teaching local doctors about advanced trauma treatment techniques. The Valorians with her looked excited, chattering among themselves about what they had learned. Lisa greeted Hayes with a casual nod and turned to Relnath. "Captain, your doctors are incredibly skilled. They picked up the techniques faster than some human medical students I've taught." One of the Valorian doctors, a young female named Pristin, spoke up shyly. "Dr. Grant has been teaching us about treating injuries from high-gravity falls and impact trauma. Things we never had to deal with before, but now that we're interacting more with humans and other denser species, it's valuable knowledge." Hayes looked at Lisa with a raised eyebrow. "Still spreading the knowledge wherever you go?" Lisa shrugged. "That's the job. Besides, the more people who know how to save lives, the better off everyone is." Relnath's communication device chimed again. This time it was a priority message from the Valorian government. He read it quickly and his eyes widened. "Commander Hayes, Dr. Grant, I've just been informed that the Galactic Council has made a formal announcement. They're establishing a new agreement with humanity regarding security in the outer territories." Hayes looked interested. "What kind of agreement?" "They're officially requesting that human forces continue patrols in areas where community peacekeepers are stretched thin. They're also adopting human protocols for responding to distress calls and dealing with piracy, and they're implementing stricter penalties for slavery and trafficking, based on proposals Ambassador White submitted." Hayes nodded slowly. "Good, that's progress." On the view screen, another ship appeared in the distance. It was a large transport vessel, painted in the colors of the Galactic Community Relief Services. According to the identification transponder, it was carrying freed captives back to their homeworlds. More than 200 beings had been recovered from various creche holdings in the past 6 months, and all of them were being returned to their families. Lisa watched the transport ship and spoke softly. "That's why we do this. That right there. Every person on that ship gets to go home because we chose to answer a distress call." A group of Valorian civilians approached, asking politely if they could speak with the humans. They were family members of the crew that had been aboard the Gentle Tide, and they wanted to express their gratitude personally. Hayes and Lisa spent the next hour talking with them, listening to their stories, accepting their thanks with humble grace. Later that evening, after the ceremonies had ended and the crowds had dispersed, Relnath found himself alone with Hayes on the observation deck once more. The human was preparing to return to the Harbinger, which was docked nearby. "Commander, may I ask you something personal?" Relnath said. "Of course. When you received our distress call, you were 6 hours away at normal speed. You had no obligation to respond. Your ships could have been damaged in the fight. Your crew could have been hurt. Why did you take that risk for strangers?" Hayes was quiet for a moment, looking out at the stars. When he spoke, his voice carried a weight of emotion that Relnath had never heard from him before. "On Earth, we have a saying. It goes, the only thing necessary for evil to triumph is for good people to do nothing. Humans learned that lesson the hard way over thousands of years of history. We learned what happens when people who can help choose not to. We learned the cost of looking away when someone needs help." He turned to face Relnath directly. "My species nearly destroyed itself dozens of times. We fought wars that killed millions. We created weapons that could end all life on our planet. We did terrible things to each other. But we also learned from those mistakes. We learned that strength without compassion is just brutality. We learned that having power means having responsibility." Hayes pulled something from his pocket. It was the Valorian crystal that Relnath had sent him months ago, the one that symbolized safe journeys. "When we heard your distress call, there was never any question about whether we would respond. The only question was how fast we could get there. Because if we can help someone and we choose not to, then what's the point of having all this strength? What's the point of surviving on a death world, of building these ships, of learning to fight, if we don't use it to protect people who need protection?" Relnath felt his eyes filling with tears, a Valorian expression of deep emotion. "Your species gives me hope, Commander. Before I met you, I thought power and kindness couldn't exist together. I thought beings who could fight the way you do would only use that ability to take from others like the creche did. But you proved me wrong." Hayes smiled, a genuine expression of warmth. "We're not perfect, Captain. Humans still make mistakes. We still struggle with our own darkness sometimes. But we try. We try to be better than we were." We try to use our strength for good. And when someone sends out a distress call, we answer, always. They shook hands, human and Valorian, a gesture of friendship that had become common in the months since the Harbinger event. As Hayes prepared to leave, Relnath called out one more time. Commander, if we ever need help again, will you come? Hayes looked back and his response was immediate and certain. Yes, that's a promise. As the human shuttle departed from the station, Relnath returned to the observation deck. He watched the Harbinger and its escort ships prepare to leave, their engines glowing bright against the darkness of space. Around him, Valorian families went about their lives in peace and safety, no longer fearing pirates or slavers. The galaxy had learned something important in the past 6 months. The scariest thing in space wasn't a species that could fight. It wasn't advanced weapons or fast ships or soldiers trained from birth for war. The scariest thing was a species that could do all of those things and chose to use that power to protect others. Humans were Deathworlders, born from a planet that had tried to kill them for millions of years. They were warriors who understood violence in ways most species couldn't imagine, but they were also protectors, who would cross any distance and face any threat to answer a distress call from strangers. And that combination of strength and compassion made them something the galaxy had never seen before. It made them heroes. Somewhere in the outer darkness, another species would eventually send a distress call. And when they did, human ships would tear through space at impossible speeds,